Beth Hillman. Welcome to Stories from the Field.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so grateful to have you here because you're a parent coach. You're a mother of 5 boys.
Crazy.
And,
I know.
uh,
I get that a lot.
well, or blessed, or something in between, depending on the day or the moment.
That's so true. Yeah.
And your journey to being a parent coach is really it's a deeply personal journey. I looked at your website. I saw this beautiful video that you did. So why don't you share a little about your journey into being a parent coach, what you provide at your coaching service, and also don't forget, talk about your new podcast, which is amazing.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So we'll be here for about 10 hours, right?
All the time you want.
Just kidding. Just kidding, everybody. Okay. Our fourth son, when he was about 14, 15, started to be extremely angry. That was like one of the first I would say weird things that were going on. And we didn't know what was going on. And finally, there's lots of fun little different nuances within our story. But we found out, and he was the one who finally said, okay, this is a good part, actually. I didn't know what was going on. And I kept asking, and he kept saying, you don't want to know. You don't want to know what's going on. And I'd say, yes, I do. He'd say, no, you don't. You can't handle it. And I'm like, anyway, these were the discussions, which is very interesting, I think. There were weeks of that, months of that. And my husband and I we feel like we're very present parents. You really honestly just do the best you can with what you have, right? And anyway, one day I said, I just felt like this was the moment. Nobody else was in the house. I did go up to his room. I knocked and I said, hey, listen, if it's sex, drugs, rock and roll, we love you. And I actually said, I'm really hoping it's rock and roll. And he just opened the door. He started laughing and then he just bawled. Very interesting, right? But there's this kid who was deep into substances and we had no idea and he had been very good at hiding it. Sometimes they tend to be very good at hiding and covering that all up. So he divulged to us what was going on. And after that, he sailed into nowhere. So I think what happened is he had been putting up this facade and doing very good at covering all his tracks and keeping up with school to like some degree and all these things. So we were left pretty confused. But after he had actually told us everything, he disappeared. He stopped coming home. He stopped calling. He stopped going to school. Everything fell apart. It was really interesting. He didn't drive at the time, so that was handy. But anyway, it was excruciating and awful and really tough. So that's the kind of like the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just to give context, what year, where do you live? Where were you raising your sons?
So my husband's from Idaho. I'm from the Midwest. So like Iowa and South Dakota. We ended up in Utah many years ago and we were here and we still are here and a little community. We just sitting tight, doing all the things.
Raising 5 boys.
Raising 5
living
boys.
life, exercising a lot. You guys are super fit.
We're trying, yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because the 3 boys that are older than him, I would look at them like, they're fine. What's wrong with you? To the 4th son. That was what I was thinking. I don't know if I actually said that, but that was absolutely my belief at the time was like, what are you doing? This is not what we do in our family. I think there was a lot of shame that I didn't realize that I was putting on my son or even that I had in my head, but I'm sure it showed. Very sure. So he sailed off into nowhere and we were just dumbfounded. I think we were in literal frozen like crisis. We couldn't do anything. We didn't ground him. We didn't punish him. We didn't catch it. We just felt like he was slipping through our fingers and very alone. We were not willing to tell anyone. There's so much shame involved for most, I would say almost every parent I talk to. There's shame. You're embarrassed and it feels like it's all your fault, even though in your head you're blaming your kid, but really down deep you're blaming yourself. That's what I find happens. And so I would walk through the neighborhood, just literally feeling, please, no one know, please, no one know what's really going on in our house. It was like this very interesting pretend space I was in for probably a couple months. And then I started hearing some of my friends, I'm friends with many of my neighbors, and they would come to me and say, hey, we hear he's not doing so well. And I was like, what do you mean? I kind of did this pretend thing for a little while. Very interesting. What do you mean? Then our sister-in-law, my husband's sister-in-law came over. She happened to be working as a life coach somewhere. She has training in neurodivergency. So she came over and she's like, we are not letting him go. And I remember thinking, what do you mean we're not letting him go? He's gone. That is so odd to me now. But at the time, I felt like there was nothing to do. I care about my son. I love him very much. But at the time, I just thought, no, we've lost him. I don't know if any parents have ever felt that, but that is how I felt. And when she said we're not letting him go, I was like, you got an idea? What are we supposed to do? And it kicked me into gear. And so then we started to be willing to ask people for help because we were so afraid of the judgment. And so my husband's like, I'm going to call a friend who actually used to be a wilderness guide back in like the mid 90s. And now he's a social worker. So he seemed like the great person to call. And by the way, he had dabbled, shall we say, in high school with lots of different substances and whatnot. So I felt like less judgment would come from him. And we called him, and he was amazing. And I'm sure because of all his education and his training, he worked in wilderness for 5 years, I think, as a guide. And he knew just what to say to us and helped us feel so not alone, related to us. And he said, have you ever considered wilderness therapy? And we were like, what? What are you talking? Like, we go camp, like we were very active. We go camping, we go hiking. We're like, are you just saying take him on another camping trip? Like, we had no idea. Yeah. And so
Even though you live in Utah, where there at that time, you said what year was it?
Okay, this is 2017.
So there were a lot of programs operating at the time, and you just didn't even know they existed.
I had no idea. No idea.
Right.
He introduced us. He got us a hold of Shane Gallagher.
From Wingate, right? Oh,
yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Shane and Sherry. So he knew them personally, we just were able to meet them personally, which was nice. And they said a couple things to us that I don't know how many parents get that, but Shane did say, Beth, don't wait. Don't wait. Because I was like, he's got to get his driver's license, and I have tickets to Tony Robbins.
And for you and your son, or wanted?
It was for me and my son, but I thought the 4-day event would be like all he needed.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. And Shane was the one who said, just don't wait. Don't do it. From what I was telling him, Shane was like, the sooner the better. When are you going to bring him? And I'm like, oh no, we're not going to. They sat there and took the time. And that was really important to me, that they saw us as individuals. They heard our son's story. They knew what was after we informed them. And they were like, now is the time. So that was really helpful for us. And to have someone say, yeah, he's checking all the boxes. Like, we're not just playing anymore. This is serious. And another interesting thing is, and I know this is very difficult, but this is just our story. And so this is it. But Shane also said, if there's any way he'll go, you need to ask. If there's any way. And I'm like, we don't even know where he is. He's gone for days on end. I don't even know when he'll be in my house again. And Shade said, he'll come back. And if you're ready, it could work out. And so he really gave me the strength, as well as my oldest son, who at the time was about 21. The wilderness kid is 15. His older brother is 21. And he was advocating for him. And he said, you got to ask him, Mom. Now, how he knew that, I don't know. I think he was just like, you have to ask him. Don't just take him, which I know sometimes parents don't feel like they have the option. I get that. So I want to have empathy for that. But we came up with the plan that we were going to ask him. And if he didn't agree, then at some time we would then have him transported. That was the idea. So one day we didn't know the date was coming, the date that we were going to take him. And my husband was going to drive him down because we're not that far. And he came in one day. We hadn't seen him for probably a good 2 or 3 days. And he came in and sat down, and he was shockingly somewhat sober, which was not expected. And he's like, "Hey, parents."
Hey, parent? That's what he said?
He did. He said, "Hey, parents." And we're like, "Hi." And my husband looks at me and he looks at our son and he goes, "Do you want to live like Bear Grylls for 3 months?" That was it.
And
That's
what'd your
all.
son say?
And he
Say,
goes, he actually sat down for a good couple seconds and he looked at us both like with the knowing eyes. I don't even know how he knew. And he goes, "I'll go."
wow.
That's what happened. It was like the
Did
most
you
tense
like
moment of
just
my life.
break down crying then? Like what was that like when he said, because you were anxious about it clearly, right? Your
Oh my
older
gosh.
son, no, you were all work, it was in your, and he just said, yes. What was that like? What did that feel like to you?
Honestly, it felt like a joke, to be completely honest. I thought there's no way. Like he wasn't stealing from us. He wasn't really lying to us. It was like it's like I didn't know him. That's how I felt. And so when he
So
said,
you
"I'll
didn't know.
go," I was like, if I would have had words, I would have said, "Prove it." But I didn't say that. And I'm glad I didn't say that. But I think that's how I was feeling, was like, okay. And then I said, and I started to explain some things. And he goes, "No, I don't want to hear anything else. I don't want to know." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "When?" And it was like on a Friday. And I think we were going to have him there by Monday. And so my husband says Monday, and he lost his lost his crap on us. And then finally my husband said, "Is there a better day? Is Tuesday better?" Which I thought was great. And he's, "Okay, fine." "I'm going to leave right now. I will be back on Sunday." Yeah. And he walked out. And we were just like, "Wait, what?" Oh, yeah, I can see your face. And that's stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really stressful. And so we just had to trust. And I just kept thinking, well, he either will or won't. He'll either come back or he won't. And then we'll have to do it. We'll just have to do something. Anyway, I won't have to go deep. I won't keep to this much detail, but there's some significant things here, I think, that really helped his journey. And that was a significant piece of his journey, that we gave him. The most scary option was to take that leap and ask him. It was excruciating. And we did it. And we will be, for he and us, I think, are forever reaping the good consequences of that ask, even though I know it's not always available. And so he came home on Sunday. Shocking. He walked in the door and I was like, okay. And he goes, "What do I need to pack?" And we're like, "Nothing." And my husband got up about 4 a.m. the next morning. They drove down and I couldn't go. I was shaking so bad. I was like in another state. I couldn't even think, let alone get in the car with this kid. I was so worried and afraid and just out of my senses. And so my husband drove him down. And during that conversation, our son did say, "I didn't know how to get out. I had no idea how to get out." I am desperate to get away. So we did not know that. He could not ask us that. But because I think we offered and then he took it, then he was able to say. And in fact, that was 2017, right? That's a bit of years ago, 8 years ago. And just this weekend, I was just telling Will here that we went on a little hiking trip with him. And he said again, "I didn't know how to get out." And we didn't know. He was so young. And so that's fascinating. And I know some kids don't want out. That's true. But apparently he did. And I think that was huge. We just happened to catch him when he wanted it as bad as we did. That's very unique, I think. So,
And depending, like there's this stages of change model
yeah.
where pre-contemplation, no way, there's nothing wrong. And he was clearly like, there's something wrong, but I don't know how. Sometimes I feel it's wrong. Some people can stay in that till they die, or some
Yeah.
people can stay to it till New Year's and say, that's the day. And that's what your son did.
Very-
Gratitude for that, right?
Yeah.
Total gratitude.
Totally. And I don't know if it happened because he went so hard so fast. Because he told us, like, I think it was early September, and then it was January of 2018 that we asked. And he went so, like, swoosh down into the depths. I think that might have had something to do with it. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So he went willingly. And so he dug in. He did. And I'm sure it helped that we were very outdoorsy. So he had done 3-4 day backpacking trips. He had hiked long miles. He was a Boy Scout. He had some skills there that it wasn't like excruciating for him. He was basically like, shut up, all you wimps. He was a little bit like that, which of course he had his own lessons to learn. But anyway, so he went, okay, so here's the quick part. Well, not the quick part. During that time that he was in wilderness, I had, can I use the phrase come to Jesus moments? I was like, oh no, what are we going to do now? What? Wait a minute. And I felt some relief because I knew where he was. I knew he was safe. I knew he was detoxing. There was a lot of relief, but that came with so much concern. I'm like, we are not prepared. What are we going to do? And for all of that, Wingate was awesome for our son. I think it was literally the perfect program for him. Pretty outdoorsy, pretty bare bones, which I think he could handle. They didn't have at the time they're closed now, but they didn't have a lot of parent support, if any. They had an alumni call and they had us read Anatomy of Peace, which is a very helpful book, but we needed like way more training if you're going to get down to like family dynamic type stuff. We were not changed. So what happened when he came out of wilderness, we had been talking to his therapist, but that wasn't our therapist. We didn't have a therapist. We didn't have a coach. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we decided to move because we could not afford residential in any way, shape, or form. We had already taken a mortgage out on our house to pay for wilderness. So then that was that.
Okay.
So the therapist said, we will work with what you got. And if that's not an option, then it's off the table. And I said, I appreciate that because and my husband and I both had remote jobs. We had minimal insurance. And so we decided to move, which was just one of those things we felt like we have this. And the therapist said, he's like, I'm not going to say I have no idea what it's going to do, but I think it'll buy you time. And I did appreciate that because he said, the more time that his brain is sober and clear, then the better, likelihood of him staying sober. And he goes, so if anything, you're buying him time, and I'm all for it. So we moved, and I'm sure everyone at least has moved once. It is a lot of work. And so we just started figuring out everything we had to move and just all the pieces. There's tons of pieces that had to fit in. We had some real beautiful things happen and we ended up moving. And he was clean for probably 5 months, which is awesome. And really, I felt like a miracle, honestly. He got a landscaping job, so he was very tired at the end of the day, which was purposeful. And he was willing. He is a hard worker. And that's one thing that that is who he is. He is a hard worker. I think that was very advantageous for him. It helped with his confidence in the wilderness. It helped with his confidence afterward. So he just dug in. But by the time school started in the new state, we moved to Idaho, he actually came to me and he said, within 5 minutes, I will know who to get it from and I will have it. And I was like, wait, what? Wait, no, this is all fixed. We're all cured now. Everything's fine. You've been clean for 5 months. What are you talking about? It floored me. And then I said, and by the way, I hadn't been doing any work on myself. I didn't know what to do. No, I can say nobody instructed me, but also, I mean, I was reading books, but I don't feel like any of them really gave me the tools. And so our family dynamics, I think we're pretty the same, to be honest. And I also remember it was probably in the summer, and I was still at the house trying to pack up everything. My husband was living in Idaho with our son, and he came back once, and I was freaking out like I did. And my son said to me, you know, Mom, you know what? You're just probably having a tough moment. Let's go ahead and table this. He was using like every skill he had on me. And I had a very distinct impression. Oh shit. Excuse me, my language. The tables have turned and that's not good. Like he is more in control of his emotions now than I am. And I did really have that moment of, oh no, he has learned things and I haven't. And what am I going to do about that? He is going to sail past me and I will no longer be able to parent him. So all of that kind of came flooding in this moment where he held all this space for me. And that was when I was like, oh my goodness, I have to do something here. I have a part to play. I just don't know what it is. And so what happened is, yeah, he went to school. He started using again. And luckily there was a few changes. The hard stuff was gone. The pills were gone. And he was mostly just smoking weed. And at that point we were like, better than before. And so we knew that. And the friends he was hanging out with, instead of being 25, which they were, like he's 15, he's got this 20, mind you, he has 3 older brothers, right? So he's used to hanging out with older kids. So in Utah, he had all these older kids who had graduated high school who were coming and picking him up, giving him everything for free. He didn't pay once, he said. Not once. Isn't that fascinating? Anyway, but now he's hanging out with 16-year-olds. So some things like some significant changes, I would say, we did see. But at the time I was like, what am I going to do? So I couldn't hold boundaries. I remember I called the wilderness therapist and I said, because he had just said, let me know if you need me. So 5 months had gone by. By the way, we had set up a therapist with our son. So our son was seeing a therapist at the time. We weren't. Because, at that time, I still thought my kid needs fixed here. So I'll just wait around until my kid gets fixed. I think that's where I was still. And let's see. I just lost my train of thought. Yes.
Let's take a quick pause here for a second. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay. So my son is passing me up I felt emotionally, he has way more emotional intelligence than I do. And I'm just sitting here thinking, what in the world am I going to do? So within 2 weeks of school starting, he was using again, like I said, a little bit, quote, like different. It was different. And it felt better. But within 2 weeks, we got a call from the cops. And they're like, hey, we think there's drugs in your son's truck. And I lost it, Will. I completely lost myself. I grabbed my husband because I was driving around. We go to where they said it was at the McDonald's parking lot. I swear it's always in McDonald's. I don't know what that's true, but it feels like. And I just had it. I was like, and my brain was telling me things like, we will never survive this. Like, we can't go back the way it was. We have literally given up everything for this kid. And here we are back again. Here we go again, those types of things. And the cops asked me permission to search his truck. I said yes. So they were quite a ways into the parking lot. And he was with like 10 of his brand new friends, right? He'd just started school. He didn't have any friends in the summer. He'd made like maybe one friend. And so these were brand new kids, brand new school. And some people, anyway, I unleashed my wrath on them. I swore at them. I threatened them. I said, don't you dare talk to my son again. He's trouble. You don't want to be seen with him. I shamed my son. I lost it. And I remember shaking and I remember spitting. It was a real animal in a cage type feeling. It was really rough. Not only rough on me, very rough, but my son didn't hear any of that. So I lose it. And my husband is looking at me with the widest eyes. What are you doing, thing? There's another couple other moms there, and they're all looking at me like, this is a brand new town, right? Nobody knows me. And they literally I look like I'm crazy. And the cops come back and they're like, we didn't find anything. That's a very significant part of the story because I had not even considered, because my son's like, there's nothing here. And I'm like, there was nothing in me that believed him. And so they're like, there's nothing here. We can't take him in. And I basically was like, you should take him in anyway. I was just off my rocker. And my husband's like, we're going to go now. And there was 2 cars and I have my son sit with me and I berate him all the way home. I'm like, we cannot do this. I'm so sick of this stuff. He starts, giving it back to me. And we're in this huge fight, yelling match. And we walk into the house, we're yelling. And my husband just like tells us to go to our rooms at this point, which I probably deserved. And I then went into a huge shame spiral and I just started bawling. It was like I just had a huge meltdown. And I cried all night thinking that I would never see my son again. I was like, he's going to leave and it'll be my fault. And after that, it was like it was a weekend. We survived, but I couldn't get out of that shame spiral. And by the way, my youngest is significantly younger than this wilderness kid. They're 14 years apart. So I have a 2-year-old at the time. So I am showing up for the 2-year-old barely. And I started to put him in daycares. I got it all set up really fast. And I started to drop the 2-year-old off. And then I would just drive. And every day I would think, I'm not coming back. And then I said, how would I find myself back? It was really hard. They call it passive suicidal ideation. And it just hit me so strong. And I started to hear thoughts like, your family would be better off without you. Your husband my husband is a very competent person. I'm like, my husband could do a much better job than I could. I just started to write myself out of my life. That was a really hard time. Then that went on for a couple months, which is probably about 6 weeks, I would say. And I'm very close to my brother. I have one brother. And he was following along with all this. And one day my brother just said, you got to get some help. And I said, no, it's our son. Like, he needs to get help. And he said, no, it's you. You need help. You've got to go talk to somebody. And I think my husband had been probably saying that, but I wasn't listening to him, nor willing to hear him out in any way. But for some reason and I actually remember the exact place I was, I remember, and for some reason it just hit. And my brother, it's interesting how close some siblings, my brother's, he's 3 years older than me. He's just been with me my entire life. And I just heard it. And so I started to reach out to people, and I found someone who had a life coach, because I tried therapists, and I work with lots of therapists now, but the therapist that I was introduced at the time just didn't hit it for me. They came off know-it-alls to me. And I'm sure that has to do with me and how I was. But also, so this life coach had a kid who was addicted to heroin for 7 years. She had just been through it. And not that my son was not addicted to heroin, but that to me was like, oh, you get what's actually happening here. So I was able to hear her, and she was very helpful. And she stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours, which was a huge ask. And something she said, one, you are not your son's savior, which for some reason, because I thought I was trying to save him. I don't know why that hit me so hard. And she said, you don't have to do this alone. So those two things happened to just hit. And it's very interesting.
And you heard them.
And I heard them. I heard them. And it's funny because I'm a very independent, do-it-yourself kind of person, which is probably why those therapists maybe didn't hit me so hard, or were offensive to me at the time. So I decided to go to life coach school. That is what happened. So I didn't even hire her, and I didn't go find a therapist. I was like, and I had been listening to this podcast at the time called The Life Coach School, and it was blowing my mind and teaching me things like emotional intelligence that I had zero information about. Yeah. So I decide, and I made a couple goals. I was like, this is not about my son anymore. I have got to change how I do things. And I want to show up differently in my family. Just from sheer desperation, that's where I got those. So as I went through the program, everything was about me. And that was appropriate at the time. It's like, oh, I finally figured out who I could control. And I was not controlling myself before that. And I finally figured out how to do it, how to feel, how to take, I guess, charge of my thinking, not to believe every thought I thought. Yeah, don't believe everything you think, that kind of thing. Nobody taught me that. And so I just started to learn these literal psychoeducation type of information. And I started to act differently I started to be different. I started to I stopped taking things out on my son, and I just started to take accountability. I know that sounds really, it probably doesn't sound easy because it's not easy. But I remember, I think what I was saying before is that I had called the wilderness therapist and told him, like, our son's back on substances. He's take his keys. And I was like, you're insane if you think I'm taking this kid's keys. There's no way I would have approached him. But through 6 months of training, I was like, I realized how to hold boundaries without being mean. I learned how to have a conversation. I learned how to pause. I just learned so many things, and it changed my way of being. That's what it changed. So about 6 months after I had that complete meltdown, I got a call. Let's see. Oh, my son was always late. He was always breaking curfew, and he would come home at wee hours of the morning all the time. And we were holding boundaries at this point. He called one day, or no, he didn't come home at one point, and it was like 12 and then 1 and then 3 and then 6 a.m. And I had a lot of anger issues. That's what was happening for me. And in my history, that makes a lot of sense. So I would start to get angry again. But with this training, instead of texting him, I was able to put the phone down and pause. And I was never able to do that in the moment, but I was working on doing it. I would look back and think of, okay, when was that moment where I needed to take a breath? And so I was training myself to do this and practicing. And then finally, this one moment, I actually could do it in the present moment. So I went and sat on my couch and I watched the anger sentences in my mind go by in clouds. I don't know why I did it. That's just what my brain did. And so it's like, I cannot believe this kid. I hate him so much. I'm so freaking sick of this. How come he has no respect? Just constant, like the parade of thoughts that my brain would typically have. But instead of acting on that, I just sat and let them go by. And then it took a long time. It was a very interesting experience. And all of a sudden, it was like I was aware again. And I thought, oh, I wonder where he is. It was such like a neutral thought. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to text him. But it was like night and day from 40 minutes ago. And I texted him and I said, hey, are you okay? Which would have never come out of my mouth. And he said, immediately, shockingly, he responded and he said, yeah, my car got booted. I'm at the college, which he was hanging out with the college kids, but he's like almost 18 at this point. And he said, can you give me a ride? Can you come get me? And I said, sure. It was like I was being reborn, is how it felt. And I grabbed my dog and I grabbed my baby and we go and get him. And I'm just quiet. And I am in a state right now of there is nothing I need to do. It was like this existential, oh, he's fine and we're going to be okay. It was very odd. And he started into all his defensive comments, all his excuses. And I just observed him. And I said, yeah, I think I get it. And he was just like looking at me. And it was a very interesting state of just observation. I don't know. I was really in it. And I said, are you hungry? And we went and played at the park first. I didn't say anything. And he came, he said, what are we doing? And I'm like, we're just being. He looked at me like some alien had abducted me. And I was just like, there was no agenda. I had no agenda. That's what it was. And I was just being. And then I said, are you hungry? And he's like, I guess. And so I went and we got breakfast and we're sitting there in silence. And I have no need to say anything. And all of a sudden he just goes, oh, Mom, I am so sorry. He said, I know that you are awake all night long waiting for me to come home. I know that you do that. I know that it worries you when I'm gone. He's like, I don't know why I don't text. I don't know why I don't tell you things. And I said, I think I know why. It's because of what you get when you do that. It's because I am not consistent emotionally. And he just looked at me. It's like, yeah. And I said, yeah. And I'm so sorry. I just said, I'm so sorry. And then I said, but you're grounded, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, okay. And that is like seriously the beginning of the rest of our lives. And I thought, if there is anything I can do to help a parent like have that change, and I don't mean not every parent's angry, right? Some parents are avoidant and some parents are whatever. It's like we all have our tendencies, but I'm like, I felt like a miracle had happened, but it wasn't a miracle. It was work. It was hard work and education. And I thought, that's not impossible. That's just hard. And people can do hard, and people want to do hard, and people want to show up at different for their kids, and they want to be better. And then I thought, and I had so much, doubt, imposter syndrome was flooding over me. Because here I was, so imperfect, so not the perfect parent. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to teach parents. And I actually, at that time, got a life coach, hired a life coach. And he was incredible at working me through all the doubt and fear and judgment of my past self, my past parent self. And he was just like, there is no one better. That's what he told me. Beth, there is no one better. You have been through it. You know, you have made the mistakes and you are willing to share and you're willing to help. I can't imagine a better person helping a parent. So I just clung on to those words, even though I didn't believe them right off the bat. And I started to teach parents what I had learned. That's a long story.
Well, not only learned, you experienced, right? It was
Yes.
your experience of going through it, learning the different models of parent coaching. Clearly, some of what I was hearing was some Arbinger Institute,
Yes.
Heart of Peace, Heart
Yeah.
of War. You had a Heart of War for a long time.
A
At least
long time.
from reading, what's the book? Leadership and
Deception.
Self-Deception.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
Good.
actually called Shane back after that experience and I told him everything. And he offered me to come and teach the parents, which was incredible.
Oh.
So I went back to Wingate, which had been about a year now since my son had graduated from there. And then Wingate set me to be Arbinger trained. So I went to a 5-day training with the Arbinger. And then I started to teach the parents at Wingate. And it was the most special experience. So I got to go to the field with the parents, meet the kids, stay with the wilderness guides. I did that for about 6 months, about every other weekend. I would drive from Idaho all the way down to southern Utah. It was a sacrifice I was thrilled to make. It was really important to my healing and to my growth.
As I shared with you, this season, we're really focusing on boys and men and their relationships with the outdoors. And you have a house full of men.
I do.
Boys and men. And I'm wondering what sort of insights you have gained through your son's experience, all of your son's experience, and your own work about the outdoors and how it can be really impactful for a young man's mental health or old man's mental health. It doesn't matter. I would like to get your insights from your role as a parent coach and a parent of 5 boys.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I read a book a long time ago about raising boys. I cannot remember the name of it, and it said in there, and it taught me boys think in, like they use physical space to process. And so the book was very heavy on boys need room to run. They need space. They need like physical space. And that's how they process and express. And like I said, I feel bad. I can't remember the book, but I resonated with that and I took it to heart. And that was one of the reasons we were living in a town and we moved to a place where right by a park. I don't know. I was just thinking of spaces I could do, but I always took my boys on hikes, and that's okay. Not everybody's hikes and not everybody loves the outdoors, but there's other places to find physical space for boys. But I think that's a huge thing that I've learned with my boys is they process through doing physical things. So whether it's basketball or sports or even, it's interesting, my husband's an artist actually. So he is way more creative than I would say sporty. And he liked like individual sports, like cycling and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be sports, which I think sometimes men and boys are like pinholed into. But several of my boys are artists and they have tons of expression through that physical space of creating art, creating something out of nothing. I think that's been huge. I also think it's really interesting, like the masculine feminine roles, or not even roles, but there's masculine, feminine in every one of us. And since I was the only feminine role in my home, it's very interesting. As my boys grew up, I tried, and I'm not a very lacy, I'm not a girly girl, I guess. I hate to use that term, but I was climbing trees and very outdoorsy as a young person. But as my boys got older, I felt like, hey, do you want to drive? And they would drive me. It's a pretty interesting, but I had to learn that because I think I am a pretty powerful woman, but I recognized that they needed to feel powerful in their masculinity at times. And I wanted to notice that and be, I guess, attuned to that. So there were some times where I would ask them for their opinion, but not turning the roles around because I was still their parent. But I tried to help them lean into their masculinity in an appropriate parent role. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. So that,
And you grew up in a home with just your brother, right? Did you
oh
have?
yeah. And by the way, I have mostly boy cousins. My dad has
Mm.
only brothers. Like it's very masculine heavy my whole life. It's true.
And you had boys.
Yeah, it's true. So it is interesting. I feel like, yeah, I definitely think it's different if my boys had a sister. I think it would have definitely changed the dynamic, but they didn't. Yeah.
From some of these interviews that I've been doing this season, it's also interesting that men seem more interested, like you, would prefer to go to a coach than a therapist.
Oh,
That because they all had coaches when they were young, but going to a therapist, I'm I'm making a big leap there, but certainly it seems to be less of a barrier to work on yourself via a coach, because that's the first person besides in your family, besides maybe a minister or a scout leader or something like that, your teachers.
sure.
But then when you get coached how to be a young man, and then as they get older, I'll go to a coach. So I wonder if that's part of your what drew you to coaching for yourself, and do you see that in your practice?
Oh, that is so fascinating. I'm going to think about that. Yeah, I wonder if it was, trying to think of, because my boys have seen therapists time and now that I'm a coach, they're way more apt to ask me like, hey mom, is there a therapist? I'm like, yeah, I can set you up with somebody else. And some of them, now I'm all about therapists, but some of them has definitely said, I think I would prefer a coach. I'm trying to think. I wonder if it has to do with the idea or the perception that therapists, now this may not be true, the perception, but that therapists just listen and validate. They don't really help, which is not true. And that coaches are like, hey, this is probably what we should do. Coaches give way more advice than a therapist would, I would say. And that, I think that's perceived, but I think that's also true.
Definitely the training. I was trained as a therapist.
Yeah.
Of course, it was in the 80s, but still getting the CEUs, and I'm still licensed, etc. Yeah, it was. You don't really advise. You get Socratic methods, asking questions, where it seems like, and it's also a lot of times unbundling the past, where coaching like present day,
Right.
action oriented.
Yeah. I think the action oriented part of coaching really speaks to men and boys because I think they're more doers, if you will. I don't want that to sound like women aren't doers for Pete's sake, because they are. But I think maybe women tend, not all the time, to be more feelers and thinkers. And maybe men tend to like, I'm going to get this done. And so I think that might be something too. And me being raised very independently, I think spoke to the coaching world more than the therapy world. And like I said, some of the maybe well-meaning therapists that I was introduced to just seemed so smug. And I'm sure that's not what they meant. So I've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. It just didn't come across
Or
to me.
maybe they were, and you should have gone to another therapist. I think therapy, the way therapy is being practiced is changing. Coaching, there's a lot of changing going on, and all I hope for the better. And I'm really fascinated with your work. What's the name of your podcast?
Okay, so the name of my podcast is Parenting Post Wilderness. Because I feel like that's where, and not that I haven't coached people before wilderness, because I have, but a lot of my experience and work came after wilderness, right? After my son got out of wilderness. And I do a lot of work with families bringing their kiddos home from wilderness or residential or boarding school. So that is a lot of what I do. And I definitely coach parents of young adults, teens. And I think a lot of the people I work with, actually, the parents have therapists. So they're going into the past with their therapist and working on that kind of stuff. But then they come to me to figure out what to do with their kid. So how do I speak to the kid? How do I come with the heart at peace, which is, really essential. What do boundary and consequences look like? What the effective ones anyway, right? What does that really look like? So that's where I come in. I don't typically, right? I'm not a therapist, so I don't talk about the parent's past. Of course, every once in a while they'll say, oh my gosh, yeah, I do this because my dad did this with me, or I hated when my mom did this, and so now I don't want to do that. Of course, that stuff's brought up, but we typically don't dwell on it too much, and we move forward as coaching. And I do a lot of work with emotional intelligence because it was such a significant change for me that I do a lot of work with parents who are either non-emotional, which sometimes happens, or extra emotional. And so I do work a lot with that. And I love that too. Some of the things that I love to work with parents. I work really well with anxious moms because now I realize that's what was coming up for me, was a lot of anxiety, which I would never have related to. I don't know why I would have never called myself anxious. Now I know more. Now I'm like, oh yeah, I was absolutely anxious.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what was going on? Absolutely.
yeah.
And your mind, like the fears, the worries.
Oh,
How do people get in touch with you, Beth? What's your website?
yes.
Spell it out.
My website is BETH Hillman, HILLMAN, coaching.com. BethHillmanCoaching.com. You can also email me at Beth@BethHillmanCoaching.com.
Or I'll put it in the show notes too.
There you go. Yeah, my Instagram, I think, is Beth Hillman Coaching. And I love to hear from parents. I love it. I feel like I'm like the parent whisperer, if I may say so, because I've just been there and I just relate so much and I just care. So I do. I care so deeply. And parents have so much influence, even though they don't have a ton of control. So much can be done through the parent lens, so much.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for sharing some of your story on Stories from the Field.
Thank you, Will. Thank you so much for having me.